Tov. She was the only person at the Remembrance Day potluck, sitting with an empty chair on either side of her, and the whole Legion Hall knew it. Brynn had driven 40 minutes through November sleet to get there, the back seat of her truck loaded with a casserole dish of tourtière her mother-in-law had taught her to make. Back when she still had a mother-in-law who spoke to her, she had not wanted to come. She had told herself 3 times in the parking lot that she could simply leave the dish at the door and drive home to her rented room above the hardware store on Saint Laurent. But Father Demers had called her specifically. "The community needs you there, Brynn. People want to show their support." She had believed him. She had been stupid enough to believe him. The Legion Hall in Saint-Eulalie, Quebec, sat at the edge of town, where the river made its first bend south, and on a clear night you could hear the water from the parking lot. There was nothing clear about that November night. The sleet had turned to freezing rain, and the hall windows glowed orange against the dark like something warm you were no longer allowed to touch. Brynn carried her dish inside and set it on the long table beside Mrs. Arsenault's beet salad and somebody's store-bought dinner rolls, and then she looked for a seat. Every seat near the center of the hall was taken. The moment she started walking toward the remaining open chairs, the conversations around them somehow became louder, more absorbing, more closed. A woman named Diane Soucy pulled her coat off the back of the empty chair beside her and placed it deliberately on her lap. Not rudely, just definitively. They were not punishing Brynn for anything she had done. They were punishing her for what her husband's name now meant in this town. 6 months earlier, Luke Hallett had been the most trusted contractor in the region. The man you called when you wanted the job done right. The man the St. Eulalie Credit Union had trusted with the renovation of their new branch. Luke had taken the contract, sub-hired a crew from out of province, collected 3 advance payments totaling $380,000, and then driven his truck to the Dorval airport and boarded a flight to Lisbon under his own name like a man with nothing to hide, which was either the most audacious thing anyone in Saint-Eulalie had ever seen, or proof that he had known all along that no one would ever suspect him. Either way, the money was gone. The half-finished credit union branch sat behind a chain-link fence, with a laminated notice from the Régie du Bâtiment flapping in the wind. And Brynn, who had known nothing, who had signed nothing, who had been in Drummondville visiting her sister that entire week, sat at the far end of a long folding table with an empty chair on either side of her and pushed a spoonful of somebody else's ragu around a paper plate. She just needed to get through the meal, drop off her casserole, eat something, thank Father Demers for the invitation, and leave before anyone had to acknowledge her out loud. The freezing rain hammered the metal roof of the hall. The hockey game playing on the corner television cycled through a commercial break. Somewhere near the entrance, a door opened, letting in a gust of cold that cut through the room, sharp enough to make people flinch. The conversations didn't slow. They stopped. Brynn looked up, standing just inside the entrance, unwinding a dark scarf from around his neck with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who had never once worried about a room's opinion of him, was someone Brynn had never seen before. He was tall in the way that logging country tends to produce, not showily, just structurally, like the height was load-bearing. His jacket was the battered canvas kind that outdoor workers buy once and keep for 15 years. His face was weathered enough to suggest he spent more time outside than in, with dark eyes that moved across the room the way a person looks at a landscape rather than a crowd, taking in the whole of it unimpressed. The older men near the door seemed to know him. One of them, Gilles Ouellet, who ran the fuel depot, half stood from his chair before sitting back down again. A whispered name moved through the nearest table like a draft. Aldrich Doré. Brynn had heard the name exactly once, from her real estate agent 7 months ago, when she'd been looking for a place to rent. Aldrich Doré owns the woodlot on the ridge and about 400 acres up toward the escarpment. Keeps to himself mostly. Comes down in November to sell his timber contracts. Goes back up. She had filed this information away in the category of things that did not concern her and promptly forgotten it. He was looking at the room the way he would inventory a forest, systematically without sentiment. His eyes moved from the tables near the entrance, past the knot of town councilors standing with their drinks, past the women from the church auxiliary who had organized the evening, and then they reached the far end of the hall. They reached Brynn. He did not look away. He picked up a plate from the stack near the food table, served himself with the efficiency of a man who knows exactly what he wants and doesn't require guidance, and then he walked. Not toward the open seat beside Gilles Oulet, who was clearly expecting him. Not toward the head table where the mayor, Roland Vezina, was holding court with two men Brynn recognized from the credit union board. He walked the entire length of the hall while every person in it tracked his progress and said nothing. He pulled out the chair directly across from Brynn and sat down. The wood of the old folding chair did not exactly groan under him, but it settled. He set his plate on the table, unfolded a paper napkin across his knee, and looked at her with the particular directness of someone who has spent enough time alone that social pretense has become genuinely foreign to them. "Cold night to be driving," he said. It wasn't an opening. It was just a fact he was offering into the space between them, the way you'd hand someone a tool. Brynn stared at him. "You shouldn't sit here," she said, low enough that only he could hear. "It won't do you any good. People in this town have a long memory for anyone connected to the Hallett name." He reached across and took one of her dinner rolls, broke it in half, and set one half back on her plate with a matter-of-factness that somehow felt kinder than a speech would have. "My family name used to mean something different in this county, too," he said. "Names change. What a man does with his morning doesn't." He took a bite of the roll and looked at her steadily. "You made the tourtière?" She blinked. "It's good." He picked up his fork. "My name is Aldrich Duray, and I've been up on the ridge since September, which means I know something the rest of this room doesn't know yet. I came down early this year because of it." He said nothing else through the rest of the meal. He simply sat there, eating with the appetite of a man who has been burning wood and hauling equipment in the cold for 2 months, a solid and apparently immovable presence between Brynn and the full weight of the room's disapproval. By the end of the main course, people had stopped staring and resumed their own conversations. The way you stop watching a weather event once it's clear it won't be coming your way. For the first time since May, Brynn finished a meal in public without her hands shaking. She told herself, driving home through the freezing rain, that it had been nothing. A man who didn't know the local politics, a man who'd been in the bush since September and hadn't heard, or who'd heard and didn't care because he was the kind of person who didn't care about things like that. She told herself this again the next morning, standing at the kitchen window of her room above the hardware store with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, watching the ice on the Saint Laurent sidewalk catch the flat November light. She was still telling herself this when she heard boots on the exterior staircase, the metal staircase that led only to her door, and then a knock. She opened the door. Aldrich Duray was standing on her landing in the same canvas jacket, holding a cardboard tray with 2 paper cups from the gas station and a brown paper bag with something in it. The freezing rain had gone. The morning was sharp and gray and still. "Did you drive 40 minutes to bring me gas station coffee?" she said. 43, he said. "I also stopped at the boulangerie, but they weren't open, so it's a gas station muffin. Blueberry." He held out the bag. "I need to tell you something, and I thought it would be better said in person." She let him in because there was no sensible reason not to. He sat in the one good chair her rented room contained, while she sat on the edge of the bed with her hands around the paper cup of coffee, which was in fact terrible. "When I'm up on the ridge cutting timber," he said, "I use the same access road my father used. It runs along the back of the escarpment, about 6 kilometers east of where the Barassa Creek comes down through the rock shelf." He paused. "You know the area?" "No, there's a section of cliff up there that locals call the Soto Ledge. In a dry summer, it's accessible by ATV. This past September, I was running a trail camera up near the ledge because I'd had a bull moose working that section and I wanted the footage for a hunting application." He reached into the inside pocket of his canvas jacket and placed a folded piece of paper on the knee of his work pants. He didn't open it yet. The camera caught something that wasn't moose. Brynn felt the particular stillness that comes before you understand something you don't want to understand. "What did it catch?" she said. 2 men. in late May, before the access road dried out. They were using the road at 3 in the morning, which is the kind of thing you only do if you know the road, and know there's no one up there at that hour. His dark eyes were level on her face. One of them I didn't recognize. The other one was driving a white F-250 with a contractor's box in the bed. I pulled the plate number from the footage. I called in a favor with someone I know at the SQ. The muffin was sitting unopened, in the paper bag on the bedspread beside her. Brynn did not look at it. That truck was registered to Luke Hallett Constructions, Inc., Aldrich said. At 3 in the morning, in late May, on a back road no one uses, 6 weeks before your husband disappeared. He held out the folded paper. I had the footage time-stamped and witnessed. There's a secondary image here. The second man. I don't know him, but the quality is good enough to identify. Brynn took the paper with hands that were not quite steady. She unfolded it. The image was grainy in the way that trail camera images in low light always are, but the two figures were clear. Luke she recognized by his posture, the slight forward lean he always had in his shoulders, the particular way he stood with his weight on his left hip. The second man was taller, clean-shaven, wearing a high-visibility vest over civilian clothes. A vest with a logo. She recognized the logo. It was the credit union's contractor management firm, the company that had been responsible for overseeing payment disbursements on the renovation project. That's Mathieu Grandin, Brynn said, and her voice came out strangely flat and clear, like a line drawn in pencil on clean paper. He was the project manager for the credit union contract. He's the one who processed all 3 advance payments. She looked up. He testified at the provincial inquiry that he'd never met Luke, except on official job sites. I know, Aldrich said. I read the inquiry transcript online. He paused. There is something else. I went back to that section of the ledge 2 weeks ago, after the first snowfall, which pushed some brush back that had been obscuring a depression in the rock shelf. He spoke carefully, the way a man speaks when he has thought a great deal about how to say something. Brynn. They weren't up there just to talk. The room was very quiet. Outside, a transport truck moved down the St. Laurent, and the windows shuddered faintly in their frames. What are you saying? She said, though she already knew, in the way that a person sometimes knows a thing before their mind has fully agreed to hold it. There was a cache, a waterproof case wedged into a natural crevice under 2 feet of rock shelf. I didn't open it, and I didn't touch it. I photographed it in place, and I put it back exactly as I found it. I have 43 photographs on this. He placed his phone on the mattress beside the paper bag. The case has a combination lock. Luke's initials are scratched into the side. He let her sit with that for a moment. He didn't run, Brynn, or he didn't run as far as they want people to believe. That money, or some part of it, is still in this province. And Mathieu Grandin knows exactly where. Brynn set the paper cup of terrible coffee down on the nightstand because her grip on it had become unreliable. 6 months she had worn the shape of a guilty woman in a town that had decided her guilt by association. 6 months of Diane Soucy pulling a coat off an empty chair. 6 months of the hardware store owner downstairs who had been so warm to her when she'd first rented the room, who now said good morning in a voice that meant, "When are you leaving?" 6 months of the provincial inquiry, calling her 3 times for financial records she had voluntarily provided because she had nothing to hide, and no reason to know she should be hiding anything. And all of it, all of the shame, all of the quiet cruelty, all of the mornings she had driven past the chain-link fence around the half-finished credit union branch without letting herself look, was built on a lie that 2 men had constructed at 3 in the morning on a back road, 6 weeks before they'd finished constructing it. We can't take this to the local detachment, she said, because she had already thought it through in the 3 seconds since he'd told her. The inquiry officer is appointed by the provincial ministry, and the ministry has a relationship with the credit union board, and 2 members of the credit union board are Roland Vizina's brothers-in-law, Aldrich said. Yes, I know, so we go to the RCMP, the Federal Financial Crimes Unit in Montreal, Aldrich said. I already looked into it. There's a sergeant named Isabelle Chartrand who handles exactly this. She has no connections to the Marie region. He paused. But going to her means going to Montreal. It means making a statement on record. It means Grandin will know within 24 hours that someone has brought this forward. because he has enough local reach to know. And when he knows, he'll move the money, Brynn said. Or move whatever's in that case, or both. Aldrich looked at her steadily. If we drive to Montreal today, we can be in Sergeant Chartrand's office by 2 o'clock. But I want to be clear with you about what that means. Once we walk in there, this becomes something that cannot be unwound, for either of us. Brynn thought about the empty chairs at the Legion Hall. She thought about Luke in the Dorval airport, walking under his own name, because he'd known they'd blame her first and ask questions never. She thought about Matthew Grandin sitting in an inquiry hearing, his voice measured and helpful, his hands folded on a table saying, "I only ever met Luke Hallett on official job sites." She stood up. "Let me get my coat," she said. They were 90 minutes south on the 55 when Brynn's phone rang. The number on the screen was a Sante Eulalie prefix she recognized as the municipal office. She declined the call. 3 minutes later it rang again. "Same number. Do you want to answer it?" Aldrich said. He was driving with the practiced ease of someone used to long stretches of road through wilderness in difficult conditions. "No," she said. The phone rang a fourth time, then it stopped and a text arrived from a number she didn't have saved. "Where are you? We need to talk. It is important. Roland Vizina." Brynn turned the phone face down on her knee. "The mayor," she said. Aldrich didn't take his eyes off the road. "Grandin's already been talking." "How did he—" "No, we. Trail cameras work 2 directions, Aldrich said quietly. "He has cameras on the access road. Not trail cameras. Security cameras, and I knew what it meant. I came down the mountain faster than he expected." Brynn absorbed this. "He knows you found the cash. He knows I found something. He doesn't know exactly what, or whether I photographed it, or whether it's enough to bring to a federal unit." He paused, but he's smart enough to know it might be. Her phone lit up again. This time the text was from Father Demers. "Brynn, please call me. There are people here concerned about your well-being." She turned the phone completely off and dropped it in the bag at her feet. The Saint of Lawrence Valley opened up around them as they came out of the hills, the river gray and massive in the November light, and Brynn watched it without speaking. She had grown up in this province. She had learned to read its seasons the way you learn a language you grew up with. Not consciously, just absorbed. The river in November meant the last of the geese had passed, meant the ice was still forming in the shallows, meant that winter was not coming as a threat, but as a fact. "Why did you do this?" she said, not meaning the drive or the coffee, or even the trail camera footage, meaning all of it. The sitting down at the Legion Hall, the 43-minute drive with gas station coffee, the 43 photographs and the careful reconstruction of a crime that was not his burden to carry. Aldrich was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "My father lost this property once," he said finally. "He borrowed against the timber rights to expand, and the lender called the loan early through a mechanism that was legal but not honest. My father couldn't fight it because fighting it required resources he didn't have, and the people who could have helped him knew the lender socially and didn't want the difficulty. He kept his eyes on the highway. I was 17. I watched my father do the arithmetic of what was taken from him and understand that no one was going to do anything about it, and I watched what that understanding did to a man who had worked honestly his entire life." He paused. Someone should have sat down at his table. Nobody did. Brynn didn't say anything for a while. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Don't be." He got the land back eventually, through 15 years of work and 2 legal battles, and it's better managed now than it would have been otherwise. He glanced at her briefly. "But I know what it costs a person to carry something they didn't earn." Sergeant Isabel Chartrand of the RCMP Federal Financial Crimes Unit was a compact woman in her early 50s with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses she kept in her breast pocket and put on with the particular efficiency of someone who has learned to optimize every small action. She looked at Aldrich's photographs for 4 minutes without speaking. She read the time-stamped trail camera log. She looked at the image of Matthew Grandin and Luke Hallett at 3 in the morning, on a road where they had no reason to be. Then she took off her reading glasses and looked at Brynn. "You've been carrying this without legal representation?" she said. "There was nothing to represent," Brynn said. "I didn't know there was anything to tell." Chartrand nodded slowly, the way a person nods when they are recalibrating a situation they thought they understood. Where are you staying tonight? I hadn't thought that far, Brynn admitted. Don't go back to St. Eulalie. Chartrand said it flatly, without drama, which made it more serious, not less. Not tonight. I'll have a warrant application in front of a federal judge before 6 o'clock. The cash at the Soto Ledge will be seized and documented. Grandin's financial records will be frozen. She turned to look at Aldrich. The access road to the ridge. Can it be approached from the north without going through St. Eulalie? Yes, he said. If you come in on the Lac des Îles forestry road, I'll need that in writing. Tonight. She stood, tucking the folder under her arm with the methodical authority of someone who has stopped needing to perform confidence because they have been doing the work long enough that it simply shows. Mrs. Hallett. I want you to understand that what we find in that case may not immediately clear your name in the way you're hoping. These investigations take time. But what it will do, she paused, is establish that there is an investigation. That will change what this town can say about you. And that changes faster than people expect. They were back outside by 4:30, in the blue cold of a Montreal November afternoon. The river was 3 blocks away and you could smell it, that particular mineral cold that the St. Lawrence carries like a signature. We should find somewhere to stay, Aldrich said. There's a hotel on Sherbrooke, Brynn said. She had stayed there once years ago before everything. It's not expensive. He nodded. They walked to the truck. I keep thinking about Grandin, she said. Sitting in that hearing, the way he folded his hands on the table. He'll fold them differently in front of Chartrand, Aldrich said. 3 weeks later, Mathieu Grandin was arrested at his home in Shawinigan at 6:15 in the morning. The sealed waterproof case retrieved from the Soto Ledge contained $312,000 in bended currency and a handwritten ledger in Grandin's own notation that detailed, in the meticulous and ultimately self-incriminating way of certain organized minds, the disbursement structure through which he and Luke Hallett had divided and redirected the cooperative funds. Luke Hallett was located in Porto 11 days after Grandin's arrest, living under his own name in a rented apartment, which confirmed either extraordinary confidence or extraordinary carelessness, and which the estrus lays that accelerated the extradition paperwork considerably. Roland Vizina resigned from the mayor's office, citing health reasons, a formulation that satisfied no one but required no further comment. 2 members of the credit union board resigned quietly within the same week. Father Demers drove 40 minutes through December snow to knock on the door of the room above the hardware store and find that Brynn was not there and had not been there for some time. The town of St. Eulalie sent no official acknowledgement of what had been done to her, no letter, no formal expression of regret from the Legion Hall or the church auxiliary or the woman who had pulled her coat off an empty chair and placed it deliberately on her own lap. Towns rarely do. The machinery of communal judgment runs efficiently in one direction and stalls completely in reverse. The hardware store owner did call. In January, he said, I don't know what I can say, Brynn. She had said, You don't have to say anything. There was a long silence. I should have, he said. She agreed with him, and she did not pretend otherwise, and that was the beginning of something she didn't have a name for yet, which seemed about right. She had moved by then, up the county road that runs northeast along the ridge, into the timber country, where the cell service drops off and the hydro lines thin out, and the nearest thing that passes for a town is a gas station, a grain co-op, and a boulangerie that opens at 6 and sells out by 8. She had learned to read the access roads by memory, and to predict weather by the way the spruce tops moved, and to make better coffee than anything the gas station sold, which she made every morning in a cast-iron percolator on a wood stove, while the light came in flat and honest through the east-facing window of the sturdiest, quietest, most deliberately self-sufficient house she had ever been inside. She was not a pariah anymore. She was not a widow standing at the edge of a room waiting for permission to sit down. She was Brynn, and the ridge was hers now too, and on clear mornings she could hear the Bourassa Creek through the trees, cold and running, moving south toward the valley below, carrying nothing forward but itself.